The gun was already cocked when Eleanor stepped between them. "Move aside, woman." Victor Blackthorn's voice cut through the mountain air like a blade. Behind him, 12 armed men sat mounted, rifles gleaming in the afternoon sun, their horses breathing steam into the cold. Behind Eleanor stood only Silas Granger, the man the whole territory called a monster, and a journal full of truths that could destroy everything Blackthorn had built. Eleanor didn't move. She'd had 12 months to learn about men who used fear the way other men used money. She knew what this one expected. He expected her to step aside, to let Silas handle it, to be the mail-order bride from the city who'd lasted longer than the others, but was ultimately the same. She had news for him. "No." One word, spoken quietly, the way you speak to something you've stopped being afraid of. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story doesn't start with guns. It starts with a lie. And the woman who refused to disappear because of it. Stay with me until the end. Hit subscribe if stories about women who fight back mean something to you. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, back to Wyoming, back to the beginning, back to the morning Eleanor Vale stepped off a stagecoach into a town that had already decided what she was. The stagecoach rattled into Iron Ridge on a Tuesday in the autumn of 1882, trailing dust and the particular shame of someone who has burned every bridge behind her and is hoping the river runs narrow on the other side. Eleanor Vale pressed her gloved hand against the window frame. Wooden buildings hunched against each other like men sharing secrets they weren't proud of. Mud from last week's rain still clung to the boardwalks. A dog that was more bone than fur watched the coach pass with eyes that had seen too much. This was nothing like Philadelphia. "Iron Ridge," the driver called out. "Last stop before the real wilderness begins." Eleanor stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk. Her boots, practical leather, not the silk slippers she'd worn to opera houses in another life, found solid ground for the first time in 3 days. "You're her, aren't you?" The voice came from the doorway of the general store. A woman, maybe 40, with flour on her apron and judgment in her eyes. 2 others materialized beside her with the speed of people who have been waiting for exactly this. "I'm Eleanor Vale. I'm expected." Expected. The woman, Martha Hendress, as Eleanor would learn, let out a short laugh. "That's one word for it. You're the 6th one." "6th? 6th mail-order bride to come up here for Silas Granger," Martha folded her arms. "The other 5 didn't last a week combined. 2 left before they even saw the cabin. 1 made it 3 days. The last one, pretty thing from St. Louis, ran down this mountain screaming about demons and darkness. We never heard from her again." Eleanor absorbed this without visible reaction. She'd known Silas Granger's reputation before she answered his advertisement. Seeking practical woman for frontier marriage, must be strong, capable, and unafraid of isolation. Beauty not required. Strength of character essential. The advertisement had been different from the others. No false promises. No poetry about sunsets. Just honesty, hard as iron. That honesty had been enough. "I'm not like the others," Eleanor said. "That's what they all said." Ask yourself something honest. If you had been standing on that boardwalk in Iron Ridge, Wyoming, on a Tuesday in 1882, watching a woman step off a stagecoach with 1 trunk, no family behind her, no friends ahead of her, marrying a man she'd never met, what would you have thought? What story would you have already written for her? The cruelest thing about reputation is that it arrives before the person does. Eleanor had learned this the hard way. In Philadelphia, she'd been convicted by the story before the trial even began. She was done letting other people write her story. In Wyoming Territory in 1882, mail-order marriage was not a romantic arrangement. It was an economic one. The territory's 1880 census recorded fewer than 8,000 women in a population of 20,000, and the Laramie County matrimonial records for that year show 43 such marriages advertised in Eastern papers, most of them by men who listed capable and enduring as their primary requirements, well ahead of any mention of affection. Silas Granger's advertisement was in that registry. It had run for 4 months before Eleanor answered it. He had received 11 responses. 10 had backed out before making the journey. The woman from St. Louis had made it as far as the mountain and run. Eleanor was number 12. She was also the only one who had come not looking for safety, but carrying a secret that could get her killed if the wrong people in Philadelphia ever traced her this far west. The door opened with a sharp jangle of bells. Martha's expression changed immediately, from conversational to weary, the way a person's face changes when they see weather coming. "He's here," Martha said quietly. Eleanor turned. Silas Granger stood in the doorway like he was carved from the mountain itself. Tall, shoulders broad enough to block most of the light from outside. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, hanging longer than fashion allowed. His face was weathered by years of sun and wind, marked with a scar from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. His eyes were the color of winter storms. Those storm-colored eyes found Eleanor and held. She met his gaze without looking away, without softening her expression into something appealing. She simply looked back, taking his measure the same way he was taking hers. For a long moment, nobody in the store breathed. "You're Eleanor Vale," Silas said. His voice was rough, like it didn't get used often enough. "Yes." "You read my letters. Know what you're getting into?" "I read them. And you still came?" "I still came." He moved into the store with the fluid economy of someone who'd spent years navigating difficult terrain. Stopped 6 feet from Eleanor, close enough to talk, far enough to be proper, or what passed for proper in Iron Ridge. "Cabin's 8 miles up the mountain," he said. "Rough country. Weather turns fast. Nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and they're not the friendly type. Winter comes early and stays late. Supplies run short. The work's hard. I don't keep hours. I don't make small—" "Mr. Granger," Eleanor interrupted, "I didn't come here expecting easy. I came here because your advertisement was the only one that didn't lie." Something flickered in those storm eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. "You don't know me," he said. "No, and you don't know me. But we both know what we're offering and what we need. That's more honest than most marriages start with." Martha made a small sound, half gasp, half laugh. The other women in the store had stopped even pretending to shop. This was better than theater. Silas studied Eleanor with the same intensity he might study tracks in the snow. She let him look. She'd learned in Philadelphia that showing fear was the same as admitting guilt. She was done with both. "The other women ran," Silas said finally. "I'm not the other women." "What makes you different?" Eleanor set down her coffee cup. I've already lost everything that mattered. This, she gestured vaguely at the store, the town, the mountain beyond. This doesn't scare me. You don't scare me. The only thing that scares me now is going back to where I came from. The truth sat between them like a third person. Silas nodded slowly. Fair enough. He turned toward the door. 20 minutes. Trail's easier in daylight, and weather's coming in tonight. He walked out, the door swinging shut with a definitive sound. Martha looked at Eleanor with something new in her expression. Not pity, not judgment. Something closer to solidarity. You've got spine, she said. I'll give you that. Will it be enough? Martha glanced toward the mountain. Out here? Spine and stubbornness are the only currency that counts. They rode out of Iron Ridge with the afternoon sun slanting through the pines, and Eleanor didn't look back at the town, at the watching faces, at the last remnant of civilization she'd see for a long time. She looked ahead, at the mountains rising like ancient promises, at the man leading the way into wilderness, at the future she'd chosen because all her other options had been stolen. The trail climbed steadily through stands of pine and aspen on what the territory maps called the Wind River Ridge approach, a name that turned out to be both geographically accurate and climatically prophetic because the wind found them within the first mile and didn't let go. Eleanor focused on her breathing, on keeping her seat, on reading the mare Silas had provided beneath her. Copper, sure-footed, sensible, the kind of horse who seemed to understand that her rider was still learning. After an hour, Silas spoke. You said you lost everything. It wasn't quite a question. Eleanor considered lying, considered silence, settled on a version of the truth that wouldn't reveal too much. My brother forged documents, she said. Made it look like I'd embezzled money from a charitable trust. I was arrested, tried, and acquitted, for lack of evidence. But acquitted isn't the same as innocent in people's minds. My reputation was destroyed. My family disowned me to protect their own name. Silas rode in silence for a moment. Did you do it? No. Why'd your brother frame you? Because he actually did it, and they believed him over me. Eleanor adjusted her seat as Copper navigated a rocky section. He's charming. I'm difficult. Difficult how? I ask questions. I expect honesty. I don't apologize for having opinions. She looked at the trail ahead. In Philadelphia, those qualities make a woman unmarriageable. Out here, I'm hoping they might be useful. They might, Silas said. Or they might get you killed. I'll take my chances. There is something I want you to notice about this moment. Eleanor had just told a stranger, a man she'd known for 2 hours, a man she was riding 8 miles into the wilderness with, a man the whole town called a monster, the most shameful thing that had ever happened to her. And she had told it plainly, without apology, without softening the edges. Not because she was brave, because she had learned in the most painful way possible that silence was more dangerous than disclosure. Her brother had counted on her silence. He had built his whole scheme on the assumption that she would be too ashamed to speak clearly. She was done being silent. Ask yourself, how many things in your life are still controlling you because you have never said them aloud to someone who wasn't already supposed to love you? The cabin appeared as they rounded a bend in the last gray light of evening. Built against the mountain itself, from logs darkened with weather and time, Not large, maybe 3 rooms, but solid. Built to withstand whatever the mountain threw at it. Smoke rising from the chimney in a thin line, because Silas kept a fire going whenever he left. "You kept it burning," Eleanor said. "Always do. Keeps the cabin warm, keeps animals out." He dismounted and began unsaddling. "Can you handle copper?" "Yes." She slid down, her legs nearly buckling, caught herself against the horse's shoulder, waited for the muscles to remember how to work. Silas didn't comment, just continued working on his own horse. Inside, the cabin was exactly what she'd expected. Functional, sparse, clean. A stone fireplace, fire burning steady. A table with 2 chairs. One of them, Eleanor noticed, was newer than the other. Someone had made a second chair recently. A kitchen area with a cast-iron stove and rough shelves. 2 bedroom doors, a root cellar entrance. No curtains, no rugs, no decoration beyond necessity. A place where someone had lived alone because they preferred it. "That's yours," Silas said, setting her trunk near the left bedroom door. "I'm in the other. Kitchen's shared. We're not getting married tonight. Minister comes through once a month. He'll be here in 2 weeks. Until then, you've got your room. I've got mine." He moved to the stove. "You want to leave before the wedding? I'll take you back. No questions asked." "I won't want to leave." "You might." He added wood to the fire. "The silence gets to people. The isolation, the way the wind sounds at night. The mountain has a way of showing people what they're really made of." "Then I guess we'll find out what I'm made of." He looked at her for a long moment. "I guess we will." The days fell into a pattern. Mornings started before dawn. Coffee, chores, breakfast. Silas would head out to check traps, repair fencing, hunt, handle whatever the mountain demanded. Eleanor would work on the cabin, mending, cleaning, organizing, transforming the space from a solitary man's shelter into something resembling a home. She found curtains in her trunk, packed on impulse, and hung them in the windows. Found a tablecloth and placed it on the table. Small changes, but they softened the cabin's rough edges. Silas noticed and didn't comment, just gave her a look that might have been approval and went back to his work. Afternoons were for learning. Silas taught her to shoot, first with the rifle, then with a revolver he kept in the cabinet. Eleanor's hands were steady, her aim improving faster than either of them expected. "You've done this before," Silas observed. "My father taught me when I was young, before he decided it wasn't appropriate for a lady." "Out here, appropriate doesn't matter. Competent does." She hit the target 3 times in a row. "I'm working on competent." "You're getting there." I want to tell you something about what it feels like to rebuild a life from nothing. It doesn't feel triumphant. It doesn't feel like redemption. It feels like chopping wood, one swing at a time, each piece smaller than the problem you're trying to solve. Each day's work immediately consumed by the day's needs. But somewhere around the 3rd week, you realize the pile has gotten bigger. Somewhere around the 2nd month, you realize you haven't thought about what you lost for 3 hours. And somewhere around the 3rd month, on a cold morning, with good coffee and honest work ahead of you, you realize you have stopped wanting to go back. Eleanor never stopped wanting her name cleared. That's different. But she stopped wanting her old life. And that distinction between justice and restoration is one of the most important things a person who has been wronged can learn to make. In the Wyoming Territory of 1882, A mail-order marriage was legally binding from the moment the minister signed the certificate, but socially it was tested every day thereafter. The women who lasted on these mountain homesteads shared one characteristic that the ones who fled did not. They had stopped expecting the frontier to meet them halfway. Territorial records from Laramie County show that of the 43 marriages advertised that year, only 19 lasted through the first winter. The women who stayed were not tougher by nature. They were more willing to be changed by the place. Eleanor was willing. One evening, somewhere in the second week, Silas came in from outside and stopped in the kitchen doorway. The stove was going. Something was simmering. Grace was propped in her basket. Lucy was at the table with charcoal and an old feed sack. The kitchen felt the way a kitchen is supposed to feel: occupied, warm, purposeful. He stood there 1 second too long. Eleanor turned from the stove and caught his expression before he could put it away. Something raw and specific. Something she recognized because she had felt it herself. The look of a person seeing a thing they had stopped believing they would ever have again. She turned back to the pot. "Supper's in 20 minutes. "You don't have to do all this," he said. "I know I don't. I want to." A long pause. "How old are you?" She turned. 26. Why?" He shook his head once, slow. "You should be somewhere worrying about ordinary things." "Probably," she said, "but I'm not." He had no answer to that. "I believe, and I hold this opinion firmly because I have seen it proved, that the most intimate act between two people who have both been hurt is not the moment of tenderness. It is the moment one of them does something ordinary in the other's presence without explaining it, without justifying it, without making it a statement, just doing it. Because it needed doing, and because they are here, and because that is enough reason." Silas stayed in the kitchen that night. That was new. He didn't say why. Neither did she. He told her his history the way he told her everything, plainly, without embellishment. His father had thrown him out at 16. Years trapping alone in wilderness so deep that civilization was a rumor. The railroad wars, when he'd worked security for a contractor, when a rival company sent men to burn a surveying camp and one of those men had put a knife in the throat of a boy no older than Eli. Silas had shot him, dead, before the knife finished its work. "Was it wrong?" Eleanor asked. "The shooting? No. The man was killing someone in front of me." His hands were flat on the table. What was wrong was being there at all, knowing what kind of work it was, and taking the money anyway. The man I shot had a wife, 2 daughters. He wasn't a good man, but he died in the mud because 2 railroad companies couldn't settle a property line. And I was part of the machinery that put him there. He paused. I've thought about it most days since. Eleanor looked at him across the table. "You took a man's life to save a boy who was going to die without you. And you've been paying the toll on that ever since." "That's one way to see it." "It's the honest way." Something shifted in his face, not softening exactly, opening, the way a window opens just enough to let something in. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone softer. Someone who'd cry when she saw the cabin, or faint at the first bear." A pause. "The other 5 brides, more or less." Eleanor almost smiled. "I spent 8 months in a jail cell. A bear is not the worst thing I've dealt with." Victor Blackthorne rode onto the property with 5 men and a smile that had never once reached his eyes. He was maybe 50, with silver hair and a face that had probably been handsome once and had hardened into something cold. His eyes swept the property with the assessment of someone pricing everything he saw: the horses, the cabin, the fence line, the water rights, all of it inventory. Silas Granger. His voice was smooth, cultured, designed to reassure. "I'd like to talk business." Silas stepped onto the porch with his rifle lowered, but ready. "I'm not interested in business with you, Blackthorne." "Now that's not very neighborly. I'm just here to make you an offer, a generous one." "I've heard about your offers. The answer's no." "You haven't heard the terms yet." "My land's not for sale." Blackthorne's smile didn't move. "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price." His gaze shifted to Eleanor in the doorway and held. That particular kind of look that wasn't admiration. The look of someone who has just recognized something useful. "And who's this? The infamous 6th bride?" "My wife," Silas said. "Not part of this conversation." "Of course not." But he kept looking. "You look familiar," he said to Eleanor. "Have we met?" Eleanor's blood went cold. She kept her face neutral, her voice steady. "I don't believe so." Perhaps not." His eyes narrowed. "Well, back to business." That night, after Blackthorne and his men had ridden off with promises that were essentially threats wrapped in the language of commerce, Eleanor told Silas everything. Not the version she'd told him on the trail. The full version. The one she'd been carrying in the leather journal at the bottom of her trunk since the day she'd walked out of the Philadelphia courthouse, free and ruined in the same breath. She told him about the charitable trust, about the forged documents, about the withdrawals that matched her brother Adrian's gambling debts to the dollar, about the 8 months he'd spent in a jail cell collecting evidence, date by date, transaction by transaction, because the cell walls had given her nothing to do but think, and she had decided that thinking was the one thing they couldn't take from her. She pulled out the journal, spread it on the table between them. Dates, transactions, signatures she'd matched against her brother's known handwriting. "I have proof," she said. "I've always had proof. I just didn't have the power to use it." "And now?" She looked at the journal, then at Silas. "Blackthorne knows who I am, or he's about to figure it out. He corresponds with my brother, I'm certain of it. They run the same operation, the same fraudulent contracts, the same legal language, the same patience. They're connected. They're partners." Eleanor closed the journal. "Which means my past just followed me 8 miles up a mountain, and I have to decide whether to run from it again or use what I know before it's used against me." We all believe we have chosen our battles, until we realize the battle has found us regardless. Eleanor had not come to Iron Ridge to fight. She had come to survive. But the thing about survival is that it requires, eventually, a decision. Survive by hiding, or survive by becoming something the threat cannot swallow. She had already tried hiding. It had cost her everything once. What would you choose? They rode into Iron Ridge for the women's gathering 3 days later, and it was there, in Martha Hendress's crowded back room, with 15 women who'd all survived things that should have broken them, that the pieces finally locked into place. "Blackthorne's been buying up land again," a woman named Ruth said. "Making offers that sound generous until you read the fine print." "What kind?" Eleanor asked. "The kind where you don't actually own your land afterward. You lease it from him, and the lease payments are calculated to be impossible." Ruth's voice was flat. "He's patient. He's been at this for years." "Same lawyer every time?" Eleanor asked. Ruth looked at her. "How'd you know that?" "Because the same lawyer filed fraudulent claims against my family's trust in Philadelphia 3 years ago." Eleanor felt the room go still. "I know this operation. I know exactly how it works. And I know how to prove it." The women looked at each other, then at Eleanor. Martha spoke first. "What do you need from us?" The morning of the confrontation, Eleanor woke before dawn and sat in the kitchen with her journal open on the table, going through it one last time. Not because she'd forgotten anything, because she needed to know she hadn't. Every transaction, every date, every forged signature, every lawyer's name that appeared in both sets of documents, the Philadelphia fraud and the territorial schemes. The thread that tied Adrian Vale to Victor Blackthorne across 2,000 miles of country. Silas came in from outside, saw her face, and set his coffee down. "Today? He'll come today. He's figured out who I am. He can't let me stay here with what I know." "How many men?" "As many as he thinks he needs." She closed the journal. "But we'll have more. Martha's bringing everyone she could reach." And they came. The families Blackthorne had cheated came on horseback and in wagons. Thomas Brennan and his wife, Margaret Chen, who had been driven off her original claim by fraudulent paperwork, Ruth, Kate, 7 families total, each one carrying their forged contracts, each one ready to testify. Blackthorne arrived at noon with 12 armed men and the confidence of someone who is never lost. He pulled up 30 yards from the cabin and waited for Silas to come out alone. Silas came out. Eleanor came out beside him, neither of them carrying a rifle, hands visible, calm. Blackthorne's eyes went to Eleanor and stayed there. "Mrs. Granger," he said. "Or should I say, Miss Vale?" "Mrs. Granger will do." "I've been in correspondence with your brother." His voice was pleasant, conversational, the voice of a man who has already decided how this ends. "He tells me you're carrying evidence that doesn't belong to you. Evidence he'd very much like returned." "The evidence belongs to the people it was stolen from." Eleanor kept her voice level. "And it's not in my possession alone anymore." Blackthorne's smile tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means copies have been sent to Marshal Cole Mercer at the federal office in Harrisburg. It means 7 families in this territory have given sworn statements about the fraudulent contracts you filed against their land. It means the same lawyer's name appears on documents in Philadelphia and in Wyoming territory, which constitutes federal fraud." She paused. "It means you came here to silence one woman and found out she'd already told everyone." For the first time, Blackthorne's composure cracked, just for a second. He looked at the families gathered behind the cabin, at the rifles they were carrying, not raised, not pointed, just present. At Silas, standing beside Eleanor with his arms crossed and his expression absolutely still. He looked at the woman in front of him who had not moved an inch. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I made my last mistake when I was quiet," Eleanor said. "I'm done making that one." There is a specific moment in every confrontation with a powerful person when the power shifts. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a sound. It simply arrives, in the way a man's eyes change when he realizes the thing he was counting on is no longer there. Eleanor saw it happen in Victor Blackthorn's face. She would remember it for the rest of her life. Blackthorn pulled his horse sideways, spoke quietly to the man nearest him. The men began slowly to lower their rifles. "This isn't over," Blackthorn said. "It's going to be," Eleanor said. "Marshal Mercer arrives in 3 days. You might want to be somewhere he can find you easily." Blackthorn looked at her one final time. The look of a man who has just been outplayed by someone he underestimated. Then he rode away. The sound his men's horses made, diminishing down the trail. That was the sound of something ending. Martha came up beside Eleanor and put a hand on her arm. "You all right?" "Ask me later," Eleanor said. But she was already smiling. The trial was set for November in Harrisburg, and they rode down together, Eleanor and Silas, flanked by 7 families who had never met each other before October, and now moved with the coordinated certainty of people who have fought the same battle. Prosecutor Sarah Chen had the sharpest eyes Eleanor had ever seen on a person, and the particular patience of someone who has learned that truth, assembled correctly, is more durable than any lie. Adrian Vale took the stand and cried. His lawyers called Eleanor unstable, vindictive, obsessed. They used every technique she'd expected, and she had prepared answers for all of them. When Adrian's lead attorney asked her if it was possible she had fabricated the evidence during 8 months of confinement, whether stress had clouded her judgment, distorted her memory, Eleanor looked at him steadily and said, "The bank withdrawal records were issued before my arrest. The forged signatures were compared by 3 handwriting experts who've never met me. The lawyer who filed fraudulent territorial claims against families in Wyoming used the same boilerplate language as the documents that framed me. Language I can recite from memory because I spent 8 months doing nothing else. I didn't fabricate evidence." She paused. "I organized evidence that was already there. My brother assumed I'd be too ashamed to look closely. He was wrong about that." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty. Both men. All counts. Silas pulled her into his arms in the middle of the courtroom, and Eleanor pressed her face into his shoulder and felt, for the first time since she could remember, the particular relief of a person who has been carrying something enormous and has finally been allowed to set it down. They rode back up the mountain as the first snow of December dusted the trail. Copper knew the way by now. Eleanor's hands on the reins were loose and steady. "How do you feel?" Silas asked. "Strange." She thought about it. "Like I've been clenching a fist for 3 years, and I just opened my hand." "Does it hurt, opening it?" "A little. Things do when blood comes back." They rode in comfortable silence for a mile. The pines were heavy with snow. The sky was the particular shade of gray that means more is coming, but not yet. "Silas?" "Yeah?" "What you said to me that first night, that you wanted a partner, not romance. That romance was for people who had the luxury of it." She looked over at him. "Do you still think that?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of avoiding the question. The silence of a man who takes language seriously enough to think before he uses it. "No," he said finally. "No? I think I said it because it was true then. People change what's true for them." He looked at her. "You changed it." Home isn't a place on a map. I've thought about this more than most things because I've watched too many people spend their lives confusing a location with a feeling. Eleanor Vale had a home in Philadelphia. Rooms, furniture, a family name that opened doors. None of it was home. Not in the way that word is supposed to mean. Home is the place where you are believed when you tell the truth. Home is the place where your history doesn't define your ceiling. Home is the place where the work you do has your name on it. Not someone else's forgery, not someone else's accusation, but yours. Built by your hands, defended by your voice. Eleanor had not found a safe place to hide on that mountain. She had found something rarer. She had found a place where the evidence of who she actually was mattered more than the story someone else had told about her. That's home. That's what home has always meant, when it means anything at all. That evening, in the cabin with the fire going and the snow coming down outside the windows she had hung curtains in, Eleanor opened her journal for the last time. She read through the entries, the dates, the transactions, the careful accumulation of proof gathered in a jail cell by a woman who had decided that if nobody was going to believe her, she would build a case so airtight that the evidence could stand up without her. Then she closed it. She didn't put it in the trunk. She put it on the shelf, in the kitchen, where Silas kept his important papers. Visible. Claimed. He saw it when he came in from the barn. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I'm keeping it," she said. "Not to use, just to know it exists. That what happened is documented. That I wasn't imagining it." "Good," he said. "I thought you might say it was over and I should let it go." "Why would I say that?" He poured coffee, handed her a cup. "A person who's been through what you've been through deserves to keep the evidence that they survived it." Eleanor held the cup in both hands and looked out the window at the snow. The question she'd been carrying for months, whether a life rebuilt from ruins could be real, could hold, could matter, had stopped feeling like a question. It had become something quieter, something she didn't need to answer every morning. "I love you," Silas said. From across the kitchen, casual as weather. "Didn't plan to, didn't expect to, but I do." Eleanor turned to look at him, at the storm-colored eyes that had seemed so closed that first day and had proven to hold something warm beneath. At the face of a man who had chosen, every day since a Tuesday in October, to believe her over a more convenient story. "I love you too," she said, "even though you track mud on the floor I just swept." He almost smiled. "You reorganized my tools." "Your tools were chaos." "They were my chaos." "Now they're organized chaos. Compromise." He crossed the kitchen, and when he kissed her for the first time, it was gentle and uncertain, and completely right. Outside, the snow was still falling, quiet and steady, covering the mountain in something clean. Will the love they've built be strong enough to hold through everything that's still coming? The testimony, the lawyers, the family she's not sure she can forgive. Or will this mountain ask one more thing of her before it lets her rest? Stay for the next story, because the women who keep fighting, they always have one more chapter. Every time a comment comes in from somewhere I've never been, from a city I couldn't find on a map, from someone watching alone at midnight because this story found them at the right moment, I remember why these stories need to be told out loud. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. And if Eleanor's story found something in you, if you believe that the evidence of who you actually are matters more than the story someone else told about you, stay. The next story is already waiting, and it was made for the heart that stayed to the end of this one.